Why are you running?
To give people a third or fourth choice to the main two parties. And, the more votes I pick up, it may affect them in more ways that they might adjust. Or, if I happen to win, then it is a big adjustment. And as far as pushing ideals, I would lean heavily to the Constitution and other historical documents, so that when you look at history, you try to understand what worked in history and what did not, and see if you're doing the same thing. Because many times history has a tendency to repeat itself because we forget what history is and we don't look back. So if we do not look at history, we fail to see the mistakes of the past and are more likely to commit those same type of mistakes, but in other different type of ways. So it's hard to identify sometimes when it's very close to, looks good in historical documents, but if you really look hard, then it may be very detrimental once it plays out. And those things you want to try to avoid if all possible when you write laws, pass legislation, because people have to follow those rules and laws. So you want to make sure that you don't violate their freedoms also in the process. But since we're in a constitutionally based republic, those freedoms that we have also come with moral restrictions, and everybody has to make a moral choice one way or the other and how they're going to conduct their lives. In a constitutionally based republic, the citizens also have to take responsibility for their own actions also. If you have a good balance there, you will have a good sound nation. And particularly when the family unit stays together. As you have more divorces, historically, your nations are weakened because of that, because the children are not raised with a good moral influence and examples. You want your children to learn from example as you're raising them how to conduct themselves later in life, so that they don't make the same mistakes. And life has a tendency to take them up to the woodshed and really work them over.
Okay. Now, what issues do you hope to address if you are elected?
Well, one of the big issues I'm also looking at is our power grid and internet. If we have a CME from the sun or electromagnetic pulse, what they call EMPs, because someone blows off a nuclear bomb, so may 50 to a couple hundred miles in space, we would lose our grid and everything. And since we're highly dependent on it, you would have a great loss of life in the country due to that factor. The military's run different scenarios on that type of situation, and the losses in life could be up to 80 to 85, 90%, depending when it occurred. And those things we, as lawmakers, have to be mindful of, that we are to guard for the common good. And if we're not guarding for the common good, we've not done our jobs on that. And as far as the budget deficit and printing money out of thin air backed by nothing, which is what we're doing now, that is also very detrimental. It may take a long time for it to come home to roost, but it will in time. We have many examples in history, but we're just not looking at those. And as far as the climate change, like, for example, reducing carbon, and because we're causing the problem. But the problem is that with carbon dioxide, the plants use that to grow. And, in historical past, when they go back to the ice cores and that, and they can see different things when the carbon levels are down a bit, plant growth is reduced, and your food production is also reduced also. And the main driver on this is the sun. And there's a natural balance between carbon in the ocean and carbon in the air. And there seems to be, it balances out. So basically, this drive to reduce carbon and have a green footprint is going to be very destructive for the average person, because then it's going to raise the cost of all your energy cost on coal, electrical, nuclear, and solar is pragmatic. You got to have sun for that. If you don't have sun, you get a lot of overcast, then you have issues there. So you have to have other sources of power to heat your home, to also plow your fields and grow crops and take care of business. And what we're looking at is that we're driving this to the point that it's going to make everybody poorer, and it's going to be much more difficult and painful for people to deal with it. The taxes will have to be raised to accomplish said item as far as that is concerned. So we're just small bit players in this. We think we affect it more than what we really do. And there's a lot of science behind why the sun, it drops 1% or 2% in output, which is a major astrophysicists that really look at the corona of the sun, and they look and see what the output and how it affects the earth and how much energy we receive from the sun. The less energy, you also end up with what you call small or major ice ages also. Or when the sun's putting out more output, and you'll see that in the solar sunspots. You see it on the sunspots, that when you have very few sunspots over a period of time, your climate gets colder and it's much more difficult to grow crops, and the weather becomes wilder. That we can't affect unless we have what you call a nuclear war. And that would be only a temporary effect. No matter how many people die, it's just a temporary effect. And the Earth system will rebalance, except it'll be in different ways that we may not understand at the time for those that are left. We want everybody to succeed, to have good lives, raise their families. And when you look at it, there's just the logic behind some of this thinking, what we need to do and not do, doesn't seem to wash very well. As lawmakers, we need to sort through that.
Right. Okay, and finally, the growth in our state is the biggest story, ongoing story at the moment. How will you manage growth in our communities?
Well, we do have to have some planning for roads, and that is a state requirement under the Constitution to have good commerce, but we also have to watch the environmental impacts. Now, in the state of Idaho, the federal government owns upwards to 60 to 65% of the land. So that's not even being used except for forestry. Now, if we do not thin the forest properly and what you call manage properly, then you have major fires that develop. And managing the forest, you can extract minerals, restore the land. We've already proven that does work, but it has to be done in a proper way from the time you start projects. Same with forest management. You want to thin trees, you want to thin the undergrowth. That allows more growth. It also allows a greater variety of animals to flourish too, which is great for the hunters. Within balance. Everything has to be done within balance. If we don't, then our economic growth in the state will be down. And a lot of people want to come here because we have more freedom here. The lockdowns on the virus did not work. Sweden proved that. They didn't lock down. They didn't require masks. Neither did South Dakota. And their economies are doing well. And yes, you had a higher infection rate, but your death rate per capita wasn't much different from lockdowns. And then a lot of the statistics from the lockdowns and how they record it has come to be suspect due to certain financial incentives that have a tendency to cause people to do things that are not right. It's all in combination. By staying not locked down, And we should have not locked down at all. That I fault the governor for. Then our economy would have been doing a little bit better even yet, because a lot of people from Oregon and Washington want to come over here and visit, and they have more freedom to do what they want to do. As far as the virus, the CDC came out and said that actually only upwards 10,000 have actually died of the virus itself without no other ailments, that major ailments that people usually have when they're older. Mainly it hit the 55 and older group. They had a few in the lower groups, but then if they had 2 or 3 major problems going on, heavy cold or a medium flu or pneumonia would, on all likelihood, take them out too. It was just the last straw that would break the camel's back and that sort of thing, as far as health-wise. So we really got to watch our own health in the process, which also keeps our state economy healthy, and it's not as much of a burden by people properly maintain their own health. That does affect the state budget because we pay for a lot of people that are on Medicaid, and we help them. Families that, they can't afford the medical insurance, the state covers that, and so does some of the county budget in each county. So in Idaho, in general, we've had a much more freer atmosphere outside of the first initial lockdown we suffered in Idaho, which we should not have had, because the cat was out of the bag in January, February. The virus was off the races no matter what you did after that. The young and healthy, they had colds and flus. They were affected for a week, 2 weeks, but then we in the winter and fall time get a lot of colds and flus anyway, and pneumonias go with it because we're enclosed a lot. So, and the 6-foot distance was just picked out of thin air, and the science on that wasn't very good either. But overall, the economy of Idaho did a lot better than we had thought. People bounced back quicker because we had more freedom to do so. And where other states, they stayed locked down, and people are really suffering because, when you look at the unemployment rate nationwide, we've had 63 million people that have been laid off since March due to the virus, and maybe 30 to 35 million have gone back to work since then. A lot of them are very tenuous because they may get laid off again, and those job loss will become permanent. And, you look at the numbers of how many people, and that gets mind-boggling after a while. So what you do is you try to take a step back, look at 2, 3, 4 families, and try to go through what they're dealing with. The depression, the chance of becoming homeless, not being able to feed their kids, and if family is not capable of helping, because family helps family. I have the same thinking for my sons, and they were not badly affected by the lockdowns, or it cost them economically, but there's a lot of families that, they're young and they don't have much backup or none at all, and they're the ones that are suffering. So you look at that, and then you try to think about the whole number after you do that. And then you can get a better idea what's really going on. You can have more empathy for what's happening, because, numbers, sometimes families get lost in the numbers. People get lost in the numbers. And this is an individual thing that they're all going through. You try to imagine that. That's hard to do because there's so many other distractions that pull you away from that.